else.
There's a moment, and if you've ever been truly, deeply invisible at work, you know exactly the one I mean, when you realize the person taking credit for your genius doesn't just benefit from your silence. They depend on it. They have built their entire empire on it. Their reputation, their salary, their keynote invitations, their TED Talk, their LinkedIn following, all of it, every single brick, laid by hands they've never once acknowledged. My name is Scarlett Ward. I'm 42. Senior analyst at one of the largest technology firms on the West Coast. That's what it says on my business card. What it doesn't say, what no business card, no press release, no award ceremony ever said, is that I'm also the reason our company's valuation soared past $80 billion last year. That behind every so-called revolutionary algorithm lauded in glittering press releases and breathless tech headlines and those insufferably self-congratulatory TEDx stages was me. Just me. Quietly, invisibly, faithfully me. But if you asked Benjamin Ross, VP of Innovation, my direct boss, the man whose face graced every profile piece and industry panel, he would flash that signature smile of his, lean back in his Italian leather chair, and tell you he led those projects from the ground up. He'd say it with such unshakable confidence, such practiced ease, that you might actually believe him. I know because for 12 years I almost believed it too. Benjamin is the kind of man who was born for press junkets.
Tall.
Silvering at the temples in that powerful, wise kind of way that makes investors feel safe. Always in designer suits, shoes so polished they reflect his ego right back at him. He has this low, charming voice that makes even nonsense sound profound. At conferences, people line up just to shake his hand. They say he inspired them. They mean it. What they don't realize is that the man cannot code a Fibonacci sequence without crashing his laptop. And I let it happen. For 12 years, I let it happen. Because at first, God, this is the part that still stings, at first I actually thought we were a team. I believed my quiet diligence and his public polish made us something greater together. I thought that was the arrangement. I was wrong about every part of it. If you've ever given the best years of your career to something and watched someone else wear it like a suit they bought at a discount, subscribe right now. Because this story is for you. And it's about to hit very, very hard. I still remember the first time I let him claim something that wasn't his. It was 2013. The prototype for our predictive behavior engine, an algorithm that could forecast user intent 5 moves ahead, like chess played at the speed of thought. I had spent 8 months building that. 8 months of late nights and cold coffee and scribbled notebooks and that particular kind of obsessive focus that only comes when you know, deep in your bones, that you're building something that matters. He stood at the product launch in a charcoal suit, basking in the applause, speaking about the algorithm as if he had birthed it from his own fingertips. As if the architecture had simply materialized around him through sheer force of vision. I sat in the third row and told myself it didn't matter. That the work was what mattered. The impact. The progress. I was such a fool. Every year after that, I watched him climb another rung.
Director.
Senior VP. Head of Innovation. And every year, I stayed exactly where I was. Senior Analyst. A title that sounds respectable until you notice it hasn't changed since 2013. Every raise I received was quietly offset by the bonuses Benjamin pocketed. Every award I was too busy building something to attend, he collected in my place. He brought back a glass trophy once and set it on a shelf where I could see it from my desk. He didn't say a word about who deserved it. He didn't have to. And I let it happen. I kept letting it happen. Because the work was good. Because the systems I built were changing things. Because some part of me believed, foolishly, stubbornly, that real contribution eventually speaks for itself. It doesn't. Not without a voice behind it. Then came the cracks. The first one was small. Almost nothing. Benjamin had started mentoring a new hire named Leia. Young, brilliant, fresh out of MIT with a master's in AI ethics and zero clue how corporate politics worked. I watched him parade her around the office, feeding her lines from my roadmap deck like he'd written them over breakfast. She looked up at him the way I had once. I couldn't blame her for that. I could only feel the hollow ache of recognition. One Friday afternoon, I rounded the corner near the break room and heard his voice, warm and avuncular, telling her, "Scarlett's a brilliant technician, but she lacks the vision to scale." I stood there frozen. My coffee went cold in my hand. My heart was a drumbeat of something I didn't yet have a name for. Not anger exactly.
Not yet.
Something older and quieter and more dangerous than anger.
Clarity.
That was the first crack. The second came at the annual tech summit. We had been working for months on an adaptive learning algorithm, my algorithm. 90% of the framework written by me. The neural net sequencing that made it efficient in real time, mine. The entire architecture that would go on to redefine enterprise search, mine. Benjamin hadn't contributed a line of code. What he had contributed was a slot at the summit's main stage. He pulled up my demo. He skipped the technicals. He called it his latest innovation, and I want you to feel the full weight of this. He winked at the audience. I didn't clap. I didn't breathe. I sat in my chair and felt something calcify inside me, something that had been soft and patient for 12 years going quiet and hard and certain. The third crack was an email. It was forwarded to me by accident from Benjamin to the CTO. And it said, "Scarlett's becoming too attached to her code. Might be time to sunset her role or move her into a less strategic position." I read it 3 times. Then I set my phone down on my desk very carefully and looked out the window at the city below, all those thousands of windows glowing in the late afternoon light, and I understood something that had been building in me for a decade. I wasn't his colleague. I wasn't even his employee in any real sense. I was infrastructure. Useful, invisible, replaceable infrastructure. That was the crack that broke me open. That night, I opened a folder on my personal drive that I hadn't touched in years. Inside it were backup copies of every early model I had ever built. Designs that predated any company submission. Unregistered prototypes. Time-stamped documentation going back to 2011. And at the bottom of that digital archive, there was a reference to something physical, a small black suitcase with a biometric lock that I'd kept beneath my desk for years, labeled in the asset inventory as an archival hardware enclosure. Inside that suitcase was a drive. Not the sanitized, company-owned version of my work. The original. Clean, unlicensed, and entirely mine. I held that suitcase in my lap for a long time. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the specific, electric clarity of a decision already made. That was 2 weeks ago. On Monday morning, I walked into the office wearing a tailored navy blazer. I handed my resignation letter to HR, turned on my heel without waiting for a response, and headed for the elevator. The whole thing took less than 4 minutes. Benjamin caught me in the hallway. "Good luck finding another job at your age," he said, with that particular smirk that I had watched him polish over a decade of unchallenged arrogance. I smiled. Not warmly. "Thank you for your wishes." As I passed him, his eyes dropped to the black suitcase in my hand. "What's in there?" he asked. I turned. I looked him directly in the eye, and I let the moment breathe for just a second before I answered. "The future you thought you owned." The elevator door slid shut. The hum of the office faded behind me like background noise from a life I was already done living. But I wasn't finished. Not quite yet. Because here's the thing about 12 years of silence. It gives you time. Time to watch, to document, to understand exactly how an empire was built on borrowed brilliance. And it gives you something even more valuable. A plan. I let the elevator reach the lobby. I let myself walk to the front doors and feel the weight of the outside air for a moment, clean and cold and full of possibility. And then I turned around, rode back up, walked down the corridor, knocked once on the door of Benjamin's corner office, and stepped inside without waiting for an answer. He looked up from his laptop, surprised to see me again. "Scarlett," he said, drawing out my name like he was testing it. "What is this?" "Your farewell tour." I set the box on his pristine glass desk. I sat down across from him, hands resting neatly in my lap, and I said nothing. I wanted him to fill the silence. People like Benjamin always fill the silence. It's where they're most comfortable, in the sound of their own voice. He leaned back in his chair, the conference grin spreading across his face. "Let me guess. Old files. Of goodbye gift. I didn't think you were sentimental." Still, I said nothing. His eyes moved to the box. Then back to me. You know, he said, I'll give you this. You are loyal. Too loyal. But let's be honest, Scarlett. At 42, you don't stand a chance in this industry. No patents to your name. No public work. No visibility. He tilted his head. Your name isn't even in the footnotes. It's like you never existed. I let that land. Let him believe it had landed. Then I tilted my head just slightly, and I spoke. My voice was calm.
Still.
The temperature of a room where the heat has been cut off. That's what you're betting on, isn't it? That I'll walk away quietly. That 12 years of my work will be buried under your name with no trace I was ever here. He opened his mouth. I raised one hand, unhurried, deliberate, and placed a slim silver drive on top of the box. This, I said, is a full archive of every project I have ever worked on. Version histories, annotated commits, development logs with timestamps, private documentation, metadata, internal emails, everything from concept to deployment, including the files you presented as your own. The grin cracked at the edges. His fingers pressed flat against his desk. You signed an IP contract when you joined. Standard terms. Everything made during employment belongs to the company. Everything developed through company resources, I corrected.
Yes.
But not the frameworks I built at home, on my own equipment, before they were ever proposed internally. Not the algorithms that predate their official counterparts. Not the early iterations I documented under provisional ownership. And certainly not the integrated diagnostic system you rebranded as BenVision, the one you presented directly from a USB stick, bypassing the formal repository entirely. His face went pale. Slowly. The way a candle goes out, not all at once, but from the edges inward. I kept the originals, I said softly. I have comparison logs, data trails, audit timestamps. I paused. And Benjamin, I have nothing to lose anymore. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, voice low and even. You don't understand the position you're in right now. You think I'm walking out defeated. What's actually happening is a transfer of power. You don't own the narrative anymore. I do. He tried to recover. You wouldn't. I haven't said what I'll do. I interrupted gently. Not yet. But I want you to sit with this feeling for a moment. The weight of realizing you're not in control. That the person you dismissed, the one you ignored and minimized for over a decade, holds the threads of the empire you've built your name on. I stood, lifted the box, turned toward the door, and paused. One more thing, I said, looking back over my shoulder. Check the backup logs on the company server. I left a note in the metadata. I waited. What kind of note? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Just a reminder, I said, that the architecture remembers who wrote it. And then I walked out. He called after me before I reached the end of the hall. I heard the shift in his voice immediately. The false confidence crumbling, trying to reassemble itself into something that still sounded like control. You're bluffing, he said. You know what the company's IP policy says. Everything made during employment belongs to us. End of story. I turned back. Slow. Unhurried. Like a woman who has been waiting 12 years for exactly this conversation. That's true, I said. Except you're forgetting one small thing. I reached into the box and pulled out a printed document, thick, highlighted, tabbed, annotated in my own hand. I flipped to the marked section. Section 12, paragraph 3, subsection B. I read it aloud. Employees retain rights to intellectual property originated and developed outside company time or premises, provided such work does not incorporate proprietary internal resources or confidential client data. I placed the document on his desk like an offering. You signed this. In fact, you insisted on this clause. Said it would encourage creativity and help recruit top engineers. I smiled. Your exact words, if I remember correctly. Then I pulled out a second sheet. Time logs, exported from the internal network, cross-referenced with project timestamps. Every one of these modules was developed before I submitted it. All of it created on my home machine during personal hours. Every update documented. Every file hash-matched. I let the silence settle. That means the original logic trees, the diagnostic skeleton, the predictive pathway design, they're mine. Legally.
Creatively.
Fully mine. I could see the moment the full weight of it reached him. It moved across his face like a tide going out, slow, irreversible, leaving everything exposed. You didn't just borrow my work, I said. You built your entire career on it. The keynote speeches, the interviews, the awards, all of it. And now I can prove, definitively, that none of it was yours. He stood up so, abruptly his chair scraped back. He didn't approach me. He just stood there, both hands gripping the edge of his desk, eyes darting between the documents and the drive and back to my face. You wouldn't go public, he said. His voice wavered. You don't want a lawsuit. You don't want the drama. You're right, I said. I don't. His shoulders eased just barely. But I will if I have to. And there it was. The panic. Not loud, not theatrical, just a quiet, visible collapse of certainty in a man who had never once, in his entire career, expected to be cornered. Because Benjamin Ross had never stood in front of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. He had spent 12 years ensuring that I stayed small, stayed invisible, stayed just grateful enough to keep building his kingdom for him. He had miscalculated exactly once. But once was enough. I'm not here to threaten you, I said finally, sliding the drive back into my coat pocket. I just wanted you to know the truth. And to feel what it's like when the narrative slips out of your hands. I turned for the door. My hand was on the knob when he spoke, his voice hoarse and stripped of everything it had worn like armor. What do you want, Scarlett? I paused. I didn't turn around. I want you to remember this feeling, I said. Because from this point on, it's mine. I should have left then. I know that. But there was one more thing. One final chapter he needed to read. I turned back. He was trying to reassemble himself in his chair, arms crossed, posture forcibly casual. But the cracks were everywhere now. I could see every single one. I forgot something, I said quietly, stepping back inside and lifting a thin envelope from the bottom of the box. Or rather, I wanted to give you one last chance to understand what you really cost yourself. I placed the envelope on his desk. What is it? He asked.
His voice had gone paper dry.
A ledger, I said. 18 months in the making. His eyebrow twitched upward. He was still trying to look bored. He wasn't bored. I saved the emails, I said. The ones where I outlined the foundational logic behind the hybrid predictive engine. The ones where I walked you through the machine learning loop that cut decision latency by 60%. The ones you printed out word for word and read aloud at the shareholders' dinner like they were your own original thoughts. His jaw tightened. I recorded the conversations, the Zoom calls, the late nights when you asked me to explain it again, but slower because you were too proud to admit you didn't understand the algorithm that had just secured us a 7-figure extension from Telesk. He said nothing. I even kept the transcripts from last year's internal Q&A, the one where you spontaneously described the upcoming adaptive logic module using the exact phrasing I had just said to you in the elevator 15 minutes before. I stepped closer. Not with threat, with precision. You always thought I was naive, I said. That I didn't see what you were doing. That I was just grateful to be here. I let that sit for a moment. I was grateful. For a while. Until I realized I was the scaffolding you stood on while you built your cardboard castle. I reached into my bag, pulled out a tablet, and placed it on his desk. On the screen, a contract. Signed, countersigned, dated. My name. Ellison Dynamics Crest in digital ink. I started collecting proof, I said, the day you deleted the first offer from Ellison. The one you told me never came. Except the HR assistant had already mentioned it at the offsite. I paused. They reached out again a few months later. Nothing in my inbox. That's when I knew. I tapped the screen. I signed with them 2 weeks ago. Full recognition. Public authorship. My name on the patents. My name on the rollout. My name on the launch. I looked at him. They know I built it. And this time, I'll finally get the credit. Benjamin stared at the screen. The silence in the room changed. It was no longer corporate. It was personal. Existential. The kind of silence that fills a room when the walls of a man's self-image begin to give way. "You're going to Ellison?" he rasped. "They made me an offer I couldn't refuse," I said evenly. "Because you refused to even forward it." He opened his mouth. "Closed it. You kept me boxed in here," I continued. "Kept my name off the decks, off the press releases. You thought if I stayed invisible, you'd shine brighter. But you forgot something important." His eyes found mine, and for the first time I saw something there I had never seen before. Not anger, not dismissal, but the hollow desperation of a man watching his reflection crack. "You forgot that shadows only exist when there's light behind them, and I have been the light this whole time." He slumped, just slightly.
But I saw it.
Benjamin Ross, thought leader, visionary, man of the future, coming apart under the only thing he'd never had the capacity to control: the truth. "You'll ruin your career," he said finally. Weakly. "Going against me." I smiled. Not unkindly. "No, Benjamin. I'll finally start mine." I walked to the window and looked out at the skyline. Our building's reflection gleaming in the glass tower across the way, two worlds facing each other. "And one more thing," I said without turning around. "The new algorithms I've been developing in my spare time, they're real. They're better, leaner, smarter, self-correcting. In 6 months, once we finish integration at Ellison, they'll make your entire infrastructure obsolete." I turned back to face him slowly. "You won't just lose your edge, Benjamin. You'll lose your foundation. Because the future is already being built. And this time, you're not invited." He didn't speak. He couldn't. The truth had weight, and it was settling on him like a mountain. I was gone. Officially. Unmistakably. No farewell email, no company-wide announcement. Benjamin made sure of that. But inside the walls of that glittering tech empire, something had shifted. And outside, where it really mattered, on the stages and the publications under the lights, the unraveling had already begun. It started quietly. His LinkedIn post went up 3 days after I left. A jargon-filled caption alongside a photo of him standing in front of a server rack he couldn't read. "Innovation isn't a product. It's a mindset." 5 likes. 6, if you counted the intern who reposted it with the uncertain enthusiasm of someone too new to know the difference between a visionary and a man holding someone else's work. Then came the quarterly press brief. He stood at the familiar podium in the same designer suit, same gelled hair. But something was off. His hands didn't know what to do with themselves. No note cards. No whispered guidance through an earpiece. No scarlet in the wings. He spoke in glittering generalities. "Our AI division continues to break new ground in scalable intent prediction across multi-platform touchpoints." A reporter from The Verge raised her hand. "Can you speak to the underlying improvements in your intent mapping? What specifically changed in the data architecture since Q3? Benjamin blinked. He smiled tightly. "The real innovation lies in the synergy of layered integration." An audible pause fell over the room. And then the typing began, laptops, phones, the soft percussion of people recording exactly what kind of answer that was. 3 days later, a piece appeared in Wired Tech Brief. Sources inside the firm suggested a recent leadership shift had left the innovation wing unmoored. Analysts were beginning to ask whether the ideas Benjamin Ross championed were actually his.
He should have stopped there. He didn't.
At the Pacifica Tech Summit, normally his playground, his annual coronation, he took the stage as though nothing had changed. Navy suit, microphone pinned to his lapel, that practiced grin worn like a shield. "We're entering a new phase of cognition-driven infrastructure," he began. The front row, a panel of researchers, exchanged a glance. 15 minutes in, a hand went up. Dr. Elsa Mendez, AI researcher at MIT. "Mr. Ross, could you elaborate on the neural token condensation you mentioned? How exactly are you implementing it at runtime?" Benjamin froze. It's a fluid system. Runtime is handled dynamically, depending on signal strength." Another hand. Dr. Lin Chao from Berkeley. "You referenced lateral recursion in relation to your training modules, but the lateral loops aren't present in any of your published schema. Could you clarify?" A twitch at the corner of his mouth. It's It's proprietary architecture, still in early stages. The murmur that moved through the crowd was different from the polite confusion of the press brief. It was sharper, more informed. This was a room full of people who understood exactly what he didn't know, and they were starting to say so out loud. And then a voice rose from the fifth row.
Come. Clear.
Carrying the weight of someone who had spent decades earning the right to say exactly this. Or maybe, the voice said, you're simply not the one who wrote any of this. Heads turned. Dr. Natalia Vasquez, former chair of the International Algorithmic Ethics Council, one of the most respected names in the field, stood slowly, microphone in hand, eyes steady and level and entirely without cruelty. I've reviewed your outputs, she said to Benjamin. I've cross-referenced the patents attached to your name. What's clear, painfully clear, is that someone else has been doing the foundational work. Someone with an actual understanding of the frameworks you claim to lead. She addressed the room. I've spoken to people who worked under him. I've seen the internal code structures. This man did not design the systems he claims to have built. A murmur rippled through the audience. Not confused anymore.
Angry.
Dr. Vasquez looked back at the stage. Tell us, Mr. Ross. Where is Scarlet Ward? Dead silence. 3,000 people, and not a sound. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. I watched it from my apartment, curled in the corner of my couch with a mug of tea, the live stream quiet on my laptop screen. No gloating. No triumph. Just the quiet, solid feeling of truth finally rising to the surface after years of being held underwater. When you spend a lifetime building something real, the world eventually sees it, even if it has to break an illusion first. I hadn't planned to be at the conference. Ellison's team had given me a speaker badge in case I wanted to connect with collaborators quietly. I hadn't worn it. I hadn't even planned to stay past the second panel. But when Dr. Vasquez said my name, clear and deliberate into that silent room, something shifted in me. Not vengeance. Not pride. Something quieter than both.
Clarity.
I set down my mug, smoothed the front of my black jacket, stood up, and walked down the aisle. No announcement. No music. Just the soft sound of my heels on the carpeted stairs, and 3,000 faces slowly turning to follow me. Benjamin stepped back from the center of the stage as I approached. He looked at me, not with anger, but with the hollow eyes of a man watching his reflection disappear. He didn't stop me. He didn't speak. I reached the podium. My hand rested on the edge for one breath. The mic adjusted with a soft click. My name, I said, is Scarlet Ward. The room held still. For the last 12 years, I was the architect behind the behavioral logic models that power the intent prediction systems you've heard about today. I designed the adaptive feedback loops, the decision-weighting architecture, and the language processors that made the interface not just faster, but intuitive. The screen behind me flickered. Not a corporate deck. Not branded stock imagery. My code. My diagrams. My original framework displayed publicly for the very first time. Today, I said, I'd like to show you what I actually built. And I began. No theatrics. No buzzwords. Just real language, real architecture, real thinking laid bare in front of people who understood it and had been hungry for it. I showed them the lattice structure that made behavioral deviation analysis possible, how we trained the system not just on what users clicked, but on what they hovered over, what they almost selected, what they stopped themselves from doing at the last second. Prediction, I said, is not about knowing the future. It's about recognizing the patterns people don't realize they're creating. The slide advanced. The cultural filter mesh. The semantic echo framework. The self-correcting entropy model that revalidated its own assumptions against real-time data every 60 hours to prevent historical bias from hardening into fact. Questions came rapid fire. I answered every one without hesitation, without hedging, without the careful vagueness of someone performing competence. Because I wasn't performing anything. I had built this. I knew every layer of it the way you know a house you built with your own hands, every beam, every joint, every decision made at 2 a.m. when no one was watching. And then, from somewhere in the back of the room, it started. Applause. Slow at first, tentative one pair of hands, and then another. Then it surged, wave after wave, until the Aurora Grand Hall was filled with something I had never in my professional life heard directed at me. Not just respect. Recognition. I glanced toward the wings. Benjamin stood there alone, hands hanging at his sides, face pale and still. He hadn't left, but no one was looking at him. Not a single face in that room was turned his way. He had ceased, in the span of 20 minutes, to be the story. A moderator stepped forward, eyes bright. "Miss Ward, would you be open to presenting your full model breakdown at our closed technical summit next month?" I nodded. "I've already uploaded the documentation." A ripple of warm laughter moved through the crowd. I took one last look at the audience, their questions, their curiosity, their hunger, and felt something inside me click into place. Something that had been waiting, patient and certain, for 12 years. This was my room. This was my stage, my voice, my name. For the first time in my life, I spoke not behind someone, not through someone, not in service of someone else's carefully constructed image, but as myself. Scarlett Ward, lead architect. And the world was finally, fully listening. Benjamin Ross vanished after the conference. No farewell post. No stepping away, for personal reasons. No carefully worded statement about pursuing new opportunities. He simply stopped showing up, and the company, scrambling to contain a fallout too visible and too technical to spin, issued a single vague press release about a shared innovation culture that no one believed. The headlines came fast, and they were not kind. The mind behind the machine wasn't Ross, it was Ward. VP of Innovation exposed as figurehead in live tech collapse. Intent AI's real architect steps forward. Stocks slid. Investors withdrew. Partnerships dissolved. And when the formal audit was completed, verifying my authorship, my logs, my time-stamped builds going back over a decade, the patents were reissued under my name. I didn't fight for them. They had always been mine. Allison Dynamics integrated my new architecture into their next-generation platform. The beta hit a 96% satisfaction rating on day 3. Industry forums lit up overnight. I started receiving invitations from corners of the tech world I had only ever read about, keynotes, research collaborations, advisory boards. This time, they asked for me by name. Scarlett Ward. The quiet one. The ghost in the system. Not anymore. 3 weeks after the summit, an envelope arrived on my desk. Real paper. Handwritten address. I recognized the handwriting before I even turned it over. I stood with it for a long time before I opened it. It was less than a page. Black ink on thick, expensive paper. Brief, like he'd written it quickly before he lost his nerve. Scarlett, I owe you more than I can ever apologize for. But here it is anyway. I lied. I stole. I let my fear and my ego turn me into someone who couldn't say the truth out loud. I watched you build something brilliant, and instead of honoring it, I tried to bury it because I knew I couldn't match it. I was never what they thought I was. I think you knew that deep down. And still, you gave me 12 years. 12 years of light I didn't deserve. I see it now. I really do.
I'm sorry. B.
I read it twice. I folded it neatly and set it at the bottom of my desk drawer, beneath a stack of notes from the models I was now preparing to publish under my own name. I didn't hate him. I realized, sitting there in the quiet of an office that was finally, entirely mine, that I hadn't hated him for a while. Anger had been the fuel that got me out the door. But what I felt now was something more settled, more complete. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his guilt or his regret or the expensive paper it was written on. Because the truth is it no longer mattered, not in the way it once had. What mattered was this. I had become, at last, who I had always been. Only now the whole world could see it. Some people spend their lives waiting to be chosen.
To be seen.
To be credited, recognized, named. They wait for the person above them to finally share the spotlight, finally say the words, finally give credit where it has always been due. I'm here to tell you, stop waiting. Build the archive. Document the work. Know your contract better than anyone in the room. And when the moment comes, and if you're truly doing the work, it will come. Don't shrink from it. Walk down the aisle. Step to the mic, say your name. The room will listen. If this story hit something real in you, if you've ever poured yourself into work that someone else walked away with, hit like, leave a comment below, and subscribe. Tell me your story. I read every single one. And click the next video, because the next one is just as good. I promise.